The time is 10:44, and we're now back on the record.
Welcome back, Mr. Cavanaugh. We were talking about some agencies that you worked on in connection with the small agencies team at DOGE. We've talked about 2 so far. The last one was the African Development Foundation. What was the next agency that you worked at?
The United States Institute of Peace.
Approximately when was that?
March of 2025.
What did you do at the U.S. Institute of Peace?
We reduced the Institute of Peace to its statutory minimum.
What did that involve?
It involved terminating all of the existing contracts, grants, and firing all of the employees.
Okay. So you terminated all the existing contracts, grants, and fired all the employees at the U.S. Institute of Peace?
Objection. You can answer.
Effectively, yes.
What's the objection?
Form.
What's the objection?
Form.
Form in what sense?
Well, I mean, you're partially just repeating what he said, but then in a slightly different way.
Okay. What did you do after which agency did you work at after the U.S. Institute for Peace?
I don't recall.
So it sounds like essentially you were tasked with going to each of these agencies, terminating all grants, contracts, employees that weren't statutorily necessary.
Objection.
That was the case for agencies that were listed in an executive order where the White House stated through EO that they would be reduced to statutory minimum, yes.
And which agencies do you recall that applied to?
I don't recall. It's the ones I gave you, plus there was a second executive order in March, I believe, which had another set of agencies.
But you also worked at agencies that weren't specifically referenced in an executive order.
That's right.
Right? And what was your task there?
That was not the same task. It was to meet with the heads of the agencies to evaluate personnel, contracts, and grants, but the mandate was not to reduce those agencies to statutory minimum. It was just to conduct a thorough review to make sure that all spending was appropriate given the broader mission of DOGE.
And how was that mandate conveyed to you?
It wasn't explicitly conveyed to me.
How did you understand that that was your mandate?
Because when I was tasked by Steve Davis to go meet with small agencies, that was the implication.
The implication, presumably that was something he said?
Objection.
No, he did not say that explicitly.
So what did he say explicitly?
Explicitly, he said there would be an executive order stating that certain useless agencies be reduced to statutory minimum, starting with the ones in February. And that's what I worked on.
Okay. But then we were talking about other agencies that weren't specifically referenced in that executive order. If I understood your testimony correctly, you said that for those agencies, your mandate was to meet with the head of the agency and, to paraphrase, identify wasteful spending. How did you understand that was your mandate?
Objection.
I believe I had a conversation with Steve that the scope of the small agencies' work would expand from just agencies that were in an executive order to other small agencies in the federal government because no one on the DOGE team had been focused on those to date.
And when was this conversation?
I don't recall, probably in February of 2025.
Do you recall whether it was like before or after your work at USIP, or?
It was around the same time.
Is it that you focused on the agencies identified in the executive order first, and then you focused on other agencies?
That's correct.
Okay, and you had a conversation with Mr. Davis, and what did he say?
I don't know if it was an explicit conversation. I might have. I don't recall if there was a specific conversation where he said that you should expand the scope to other agencies that were not in the executive order.
Well, how did you know to do that then?
Well, there were other small agencies. Intuitively, I knew that there were other small agencies in the federal government that no one on the team was focused on. So someone needed to go review those agencies.
You just decided that for yourself?
I believe it may have been. I don't recall if Steve and I had a conversation about it explicitly.
Did someone convey to you that you had the authority to just decide which agencies you were going to look at?
Well, the scope of the agencies in the executive orders were all small agencies. And because I was tasked with leading the small agencies team initially with the agencies in the EO, it was natural for it within DOGE to intuitively and be proactive in expanding your scope.
Was it your understanding that you could have looked at any small federal agency and on your own initiative decided whether to terminate grants or contracts at that agency?
No,
Objection.
No, that was not my understanding. You would have to review that type of request with Steve before going and meeting with the head of an agency.
But the idea to go to a small agency might have originated with you, and then you take that to Steve?
For approval before moving forward in
Okay.
certain cases.
And did you do that in NEH?
No, in NEH's case, Steve and I had a short conversation where he let me know that the prior head of NEH was terminated by, I believe, the Political Personnel Office, PPO, and that there was a new acting chairman, Mike McDonald, that I should go and meet with.
We'll get back to that. Before we do, I want to show you a document. This is our first physical document. We'll label it Plaintiffs 2. This is a document date stamp US 61501. Feel free to take a look. I'll just say this is an email chain between you, Ryan Leppert, Ethan Shoutran, Justin Fox. The top email is dated March 14th, 2025, 5:56 p.m. The last email is dated Monday, March 10th, from you to Ryan Leppert. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is it?
It's an email that I sent to Ryan Leppert on March 10th, 2025.
And why did you send the email?
We asked for detail agreements for myself, Justin, and Ethan for the listed agencies here.
Why did you request that from Mr. Leppert?
Anytime we would be detailed from GSA to another agency, we would it would be required that Ryan Leppert, as the GSA White House liaison, signed an agreement with the respective agencies' White House liaison to accept our detail.
So these are other agencies, other small agencies that you worked at?
Yes.
And how did you come up with this list?
These agencies initially were brought to me in the context of they would be listed in an upcoming executive order, and that we were supposed to proactively be detailed to the agency in advance of that happening.
So the Institute of Museum and Library Services, was that referenced in an executive order?
I believe so.
What about the National Endowment for the Humanities?
I believe it was originally listed in an EO as a draft, and then was...
I'm just going to caution you not to get into specifics about things that were discussed
With legal counsel.
as draft executive orders and not finalized
Well, what's the basis for that?
deliberative process. And I believe that there were also attorneys involved, so it would be attorney-client.
Okay, well, as to deliberative process, I think the judge has made clear that it's because this is a First Amendment case, the deliberations are highly relevant and would outweigh any privilege, even if it were potentially applicable. She's overruled that objection in other contexts before.
Well, there's a difference between deliberations about the actual decisions at issue in this case and deliberations about decisions not at issue in this case, and this is relates to a decision not at issue in this case, and I do not think that there is any basis for asserting that deliberative process protection has does not exist at all, because certain communications related to the actual decisions are not protected by it.
Okay, let's ask a few more questions. We might return to this. Was the National Endowment for the Humanities listed on an executive, referenced in an executive order?
No.
But it was referenced in a prior draft of an executive order.
Objection. Caution you not to answer to the extent it would reveal privileged information.
Well, what specific privilege? are you
Both
referring-
attorney-client privilege and deliberative process.
Okay. Did you see draft executive orders regarding these agencies?
I believe so, yes.
How did you see them? Were they emailed to you?
They were not emailed to me directly, but they were referenced in email form.
Did you review those drafts?
Briefly.
So the text of the draft EO was in the body of the email and you reviewed that?
I believe so, yes.
And who sent that to you?
I don't recall. No one sent it to me directly.
So you don't recall whether it was a lawyer or not?
It was a lawyer,
How do you know it was a lawyer?
because the sender of the email was a lawyer for the White House,
How do you know that?
because it was referenced in the email.
But I thought you just said you don't remember who sent you this email.
No one sent me the email directly.
How did you see it?
It was, I actually don't recall how I first saw it, to be honest, but it was in email form.
Okay. Our view is this would not be privileged information, but we'll move on. We reserve the right to move to compel. Yeah.
I'm just gonna join that.
Yeah.
ACLS plaintiffs.
You join?
I joined, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, our view is that it is clearly privileged for both, as both deliberative process and attorney-client privilege.
I mean, just briefly to respond on the record, this would appear to be relate to a core issue in the case, whether the executive branch was considering and ultimately decided not to include any age on an executive order as an agency that was supposed to be reduced to a statutory minimum. So even assuming that the deliberative process privilege would, as an initial matter, apply in this case, it would be far outweighed by the relevance of the information, and I don't think it has been established that this would be protected by the attorney-client privilege at this point. So we would we reserve all rights.
What?
Reserve all rights.
And others, guild plaintiffs join that as well.
Okay. So we were talking about this document. These were some of the agencies at which you worked. Correct.
Correct.
Were there any agencies not on this list at which you worked during your time at DOGE?
Yes.
Can you name them?
I can't name all of them. It was an exhaustive list.
Which ones come to mind?
Millennium Challenge Corporation, the Director of National Intelligence, AmeriCorps, I can't recall the others right now.
Did you work at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting?
I did not.
The Vera Institute?
I did not.
The National Labor Relations Board?
We met with the team of the National Labor Relations Board, but ultimately did not perform any work at that agency.
Why not?
I don't recall.
What was the meeting about with them?
It was an introductory meeting to better understand what the nature of NLRB was doing. It was an introductory meeting.
Specifically as it relates to spending of government funds or some other issue?
It was an introductory meeting just to learn more about the scope and scale of the agency in terms of total spend, number of employees, number of offices, etc.
About the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation.
Sorry?
The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation?
I don't recall. I don't believe so.
What did you do at the Millennium Challenge Corporation?
We similarly met with the management leadership of MCC to understand their compacts, they call them, which is effectively a grant for foreign spend. So we're trying to understand that, again, total number of employees, contracts, grants.
Did you terminate those compacts?
Some of them were terminated at the agency's discretion, not by... DOGE did not have the authority to individually cancel contracts. It was always at the discretion of the head of the agency.
Okay. Earlier we were discussing some agencies, and I don't think you said that. Why did you emphasize that just now?
I'm sorry?
Why did you emphasize that just now?
Emphasize what exactly?
That you had no discretion to terminate contracts?
Because you asked if I terminated compacts at MCC.
Okay, is that something you discussed with counsel during the last break?
No.
Okay, it just occurred to you just now?
Yeah, because you asked me if I terminated the compacts, and I didn't.
Okay. And what, so contracts were terminated at MCC?
I don't know if contracts were terminated, but compacts, there's a distinction. I believe certain compacts were terminated by the head of MCC.
Okay. What about at the DNI?
I did not terminate any personnel grants or contracts at ODNI. It was done by Tulsi Gabbard, the director of ODNI.
Well, what was your work at DNI?
We had 2 or 3 meetings with ODNI's team. One of my teammates, Marshall Wood, was the lead at that agency, not me personally. And the nature of these meetings were effectively all the same in that context.
And what was the result of your work at DNI?
There was no direct result actually from our work. Because of the nature of the intelligence community, there was a much longer process to be fully onboarded, such as security clearances. After we met with their team 2 or 3 times, we realized that, and also because of my timing at DOGE, we ended up not terminating anything at ODNI. Later then realized that at their own discretion, they terminated, I think, like 25% of ODNI's headcount. But it wasn't a result of DOGE's actions.
When you were working at these agencies, were you working at multiple agencies at the same time, or would you take one agency at a time?
There were generally multiple agencies ongoing at the same time, for me personally.
All right. I'd like to look at another document. We'll mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit 3. This is a document fate stamped US 9508. This is an April 8th, 2025 email from your GSA email address to your special.co email address. And it's attaching a spreadsheet called Deletions 330 Scorecard. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
So you said earlier that special.co is a company that you are founding and in the process of founding now. So would you sometimes forward documents from your GSA account to your special.co account?
In this case, yes, it wasn't a regular occurrence. The reason that this was forwarded was to provide the DOGE leadership team, specifically Steve Davis, with an update on the relevant savings at each agency.
Okay. Why did you do that?
To my knowledge, Steve didn't have a government email with GSA to provide him with this attachment, so it had to be sent to him directly.
Did he ask you to do that?
Yes.
What email did you send it to?
I believe it was on Signal.
So you emailed this document to yourself, and then shared it with him on Signal?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Do you recall any other documents you sent to your special.co account?
I don't.
All right, let's put the attachment on the screen. This is US 9509. And we'll mark the spreadsheet as Plaintiff's Exhibit 4. So this is the attachment to the email that we were just looking at, right?
I believe so.
And what are we looking at here?
This is a list of agencies for which the small agencies team was focused on, and the relevant number of contracts, value, budget, etc., associated with each agency.
And you said that Mr. Davis asked you to send this to him?
Each DOGE team lead had to report on their savings. So yes.
How was it conveyed to you that each DOGE team had to report on their savings?
I believe it was discussed in the all hands meetings that we discussed previously. That each team lead was supposed to report on their relevant savings for each agency in which they were working.
So how often would you send this to Mr. Davis?
Approximately once a week.
So this shows contracts and grants terminations. That's just what it says on the top row at various agencies, correct?
I'm sorry?
This shows terminations of contracts and grants at various agencies. That's what it says in the top row, correct?
Correct.
Including at the National Endowment for the Humanities, correct? That's row 8.
Correct.
And it shows there's a column for ceiling and there's a column for savings, correct?
That's right.
Did you create this spreadsheet yourself?
I did not.
Who created it?
I believe the template, the blank version, was created by, I don't know who created it, and then Justin Fox typically would be the one handling the actual reporting of the savings.
Okay. So a template was provided to you. Do you remember who provided the template?
It was likely Steve.
And then Justin Fox filled this one out on a weekly basis about or thereabouts.
Thereabouts.
And he emailed it to you?
Yes.
And then you emailed it to yourself and you shared it with Mr. Davis on Signal, correct?
In this example, yes.
Okay. Let's take a look at a document. We could take this down. That will mark as Plaintiff's Exhibit 5. For the record, this is Bates labeled US 9552. This is also an email from your GSA email address to a special.co email address, correct?
Correct.
This one is attaching a document called Master Reporting, correct?
Correct.
And we'll look at this attachment too. This is US 9553. And the attachment will be Plaintiff's Exhibit 6. Is this the same spreadsheet we were looking at before, or is it slightly different?
The template is the same. The agencies listed seems to have changed, as well as the associated savings.
Do you know why it's different?
The list would dynamically change depending on week to week what the latest savings were for each agency.
So I think the prior spreadsheet was called deletion scorecard, and this is called master reporting. Were those the same, just different words for the same thing?
Correct.
Okay, we can take this down. Do you recall offhand when you first got involved with the National Endowment for the Humanities?
I believe it was March of 2025. I don't recall the exact date.
Okay, and do you recall like the first conversation you had about the agency?
About the agency or with the agency?
About the agency.
About the agency would have been around the same time frame.
And what was that conversation?
It was the short conversation with Steve Davis that I referenced previously.
And it was your idea to go look at spending at the National Endowment for the Humanities?
It was not.
Whose idea was it?
It was Steve's idea, with the context being that the prior head of the National Endowment for the Humanities was recently terminated, and that it was to go meet with Mike McDonald, the new acting chair of NEH.
So he approached you about going to speak with Mr. McDonald at NEH.
That's right.
And was this a phone call or an in-person meeting?
This was an in-person meeting.
Was anyone else there?
No.
Okay. What specifically do you remember Mr. Davis saying besides, the chair has been replaced, I want you to go meet with Mr. McDonald?
He introduced me to Mike, I believe. He gave me his phone number, and I called Mike, and that was it.
What did he tell you about Mr. McDonald?
That he was previously the general counsel for the agency, and that he was newly appointed in the role as acting chairman.
Did he tell you anything else?
I don't believe so.
Did he tell you that he might be amenable to DOGE coming in and looking at the agency?
Objection.
I don't recall.
About how long did this conversation last?
A minute.
So you had a 1-minute conversation with Mr. Davis when he told you, go look at NEH, talk to Mr. McDonald. Do you recall anything else from the conversation?
Substantively, no. That was the extent of the conversation.
Did you take notes during the conversation?
No.
And after you had that conversation with Mr. Davis, did you go talk to anyone else about this assignment?
I believe initially no, and then when we first scheduled our meeting with Mike McDonald, Justin Fox was with me as a member of the small agencies team. So he and I were in all of the meetings with Mike.
Did you talk to Mr. Fox about the meeting with Mr. McDonald before you actually met?
I don't recall exactly what the conversation was, but it would have been something to the effect of, we're going to go meet with the new acting chairman of NEH and evaluate what's going on at the agency.
Did you speak with, aside from that possible conversation with Mr. Fox, did you speak with anyone about NEH before you met with Mr. McDonald?
No.
What did you know about the National Endowment for the Humanities at this point?
Very little.
You had no prior experience with the agency.
Outside of research that I did prior to the first meeting with Mike, no.
What was that research?
Just browsing the NEH website, understanding key personnel, the size of the agency, etc.
But that was after Mr. Davis had that conversation with you?
That's right.
Correct. You didn't do any work in the humanities in college or anything?
No.
Okay. Never applied for an NEH grant? I'm
No.
sure. Never applied for any federal grant?
No.
I take it. Okay, so then you started working at NEH. You said that Mr. Fox was working there with you. Was anyone else working at NEH with you and Mr. Fox?
I don't believe so, no.
What about Ethan Chautran?
He may have been detailed to the agency from GSA to NEH, but he wasn't physically present in any of our meetings with the NEH team.
Was he involved at all in the termination of grants at NEH?
I don't believe so. No.
As between you and Mr. Fox, did you each have like a particular role in how you were conducting your work at NEH?
No, there was no predefined role.
You were the lead though, right?
In the first meeting with Mike and his colleague Adam, I believe is his name, we had a first meeting where I primarily led the conversation, introduced ourselves as members of the DOGE team from GSA. I led the majority of that first meeting. Thereafter, Justin took the lead role at NEH in terms of working with Mike and Adam on reviewing their contracts and grants and personnel.
So after that first meeting, Justin played more of a hands-on role
That's right.
at NEH than
Yeah.
you did. But Justin still reported to you.
In an informal capacity, yes.
So after you started working at NEH, did you and Mr. Fox have like regular meetings to talk about your work at the agency?
We did not have regular meetings, no.
Did you have irregular meetings?
Not solely focused on NEH, so no.
So say more about that. You would have meetings to talk about what a variety of small agencies, and NEH would be one of them?
That's right.
How often did you have those meetings?
Well, we were in the office together every day at GSA, so in the casual course of working, you would talk about the status of each agency and what you were working, and NEH was one of them.
Okay. But you didn't have designated NEH
No.
meetings. Did you meet with Mr. Davis to talk about your progress at NEH while you were working there?
No.
Did you ever update him on what you had done at NEH?
We did. After the first meeting with Mike, I think I reported back to Steve that Mike was amenable to onboarding a DOGE team, and I would update him on progress as there were meaningful updates.
Okay. And then did you provide those updates?
I believe so. I don't remember exactly how frequently. It wasn't on a weekly cadence outside of the scorecard that we looked at together.
How did you convey those updates?
Either in person, because in many cases Steve worked at GSA, or on Signal.
Okay. Those conversations you had with Mr. Davis on Signal about NEH, do you still have those?
I do not.
Were they on your government phone or personal phone?
They were on my personal phone.
And why don't you have them anymore?
Messages automatically delete on Signal.
So when were these messages deleted?
I don't know.
Do you recall what the auto-delete setting was for your conversations with Mr. Davis? Was it 30 days? Was it 7 days?
I don't recall.
Did anyone talk to you about your use of Signal for government work while you were a DOGE employee?
Not explicitly, no.
Okay, what about implicitly?
I don't believe so.
Has anyone talked to you about your use of Signal since you left government employment?
They've not.
Okay. I'm going to show you a declaration that Michael McDonald submitted in another case, not our case, called Thacker v. Trump. We will mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit 7, I think this is. We're going to be using it kind of throughout the deposition.
Thank you. Should I read this?
Feel free to take a quick look. I'm going to kind of guide you through it. So no need to read it cover to cover. But feel free to take a quick look just to get a sense of what it is. So as you see, this is a declaration that Mr. McDonald submitted in the Thacker case. You can see that on page 2 of the document. Before we get into it, you had mentioned before that Mr. McDonald was amenable to DOGE working at NEH, is that something he told you specifically?
Objection to form.
Yeah, I believe so.
Do you recall specifically what he said?
Specifically, he said he'd welcomed the DOGE team to be onboarded to NEH from GSA.
Did he say why?
He did not.
This was
to
the
my
first
knowledge.
conversation with him?
Yes.
We were talking earlier about signal conversations you had with Mr. Davis. Did you ever have signal conversations with Mr. McDonald?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. What about others on the DOGE team besides Mr. Davis? Would you talk about your work on signal?
Can you repeat the question, sorry?
Aside from Mr. Davis, who you said you had discussions over signal about your work at NEH, did you have signal conversations with anyone else at DOGE?
Probably, yes, Justin Fox.
Okay. What about Mr. Aminetti?
I don't believe so, no.
Those conversations you had with Fox, what were those?
General status update related topics around small agencies that we were working with.
Okay. And do you still have them?
I don't.
Those were also deleted?
They were auto-deleted by Signal.
Okay. Do you remember what the auto-delete time frame was for your conversations with Mr. Fox?
I don't.
Do you still use Signal?
I do.
Do you have a standard auto-delete feature that you use with your Signal, for your Signal?
I don't know. I can look if you want me to.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Okay. Please do.
It is 1 week.
That's a schedule that you set?
I believe it's preset by the app, but I could be wrong.
You don't recall setting it
I don't
yourself,
recall.
changing it?
No.
Okay. Do you have any messages with Justin Fox on Signal now that you would have had for the last week?
No.
What about Mr. Davis?
No.
Anyone else from DOGE in the last week?
Not related to anything with DOGE specifically. It would be personal conversations.
Okay. Who was it?
It would have been Barish, Akis.
Okay. All right, let's take a look at this McDonald Declaration. Turn your attention to paragraph 6, and I'll just read it to you.
What page are you on?
Page 2 of the PDF, which is it's the first page of the Declaration. Paragraph 6.
Okay.
It says, President Trump issued Executive Order 14151, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing on January 20th, 2025. Executive Order 14173, ending illegal discrimination and restoring merits-based opportunity, issued on January 21st, 2025. And Executive Order 14168, defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government on January 20th, 2025, when Shelley C. Lowe was still chair of NEH. And then continuing on to paragraph 7, it says, between January 20th and February 7th, 2025, Chair Lowe directed NEH program staff to review open grants in light of the new executive orders. And my question is, were you involved with NEH during this time period from January 20th to February 7th?
No.
Did you talk to former Chair Lowe about this review process ever?
No.
Do you know if anyone at DOGE talked to her about this review process?
No.
So then continuing on to paragraph 8, it says, at the direction of then Chair Lowe, on February 7th, NEH's Chief Information Officer Brett Bobley emailed NEH program directors asking them to identify projects funded under the Biden administration that might be implicated by President Trump's executive orders. So I'm going to show you what we will mark as Plaintiff's Exhibit 8. This is base labeled AR1, and it's a February 7th, 2025 email from Brett Bobley to, it says division directors, and there are some others copied. And it says, Dear Program Directors, here are the review criteria for reviewing all the awards from 2021 to the present. It says, as per OMB's January 27th, 2025 memo. And then it goes on to ask the recipients of this email to identify certain projects that met certain criteria, such as advancing Marxist equity, transgenderism, or Green New Deal social engineering policies. You see where it says that?
Yes.
Were you involved at all in this process?
No.
Was DOGE involved in all with this process?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Do you know who came up with this criteria listed here?
I do not.
And then if we return to the declaration, if you have that in front of you still, if you look at paragraph 9, Mr. McDonald says, between February 7th and March 16th, 2025, CIO Bobley created a system for staff to mark Biden-era projects on spreadsheets as either high, medium, low, or no connection in terms of the executive orders, and communicated this to NEH program directors. Were you involved in that process at all?
I was not involved in creating that list, no.
Were you otherwise involved?
When we met Mike McDonald for the first time, he showed us, I believe, a draft of the list that is being referenced here.
Okay. Was Fox involved at all in the creation of that spreadsheet?
No.
Okay. Looking at the declaration, paragraph 11, it says, on March 10th, 2025, President Trump terminated NEH Chair Lowe and appointed me to be acting chairman of NEH. Was DOGE involved at all in the termination of Chair Lowe?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Were you aware of any discussions about terminating Chair Lowe?
No.
Do you know why she was terminated?
No.
The next paragraph, paragraph 12, says, on or about March 12th, 2025, representatives from the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, Justin Fox and Nate Cavanaugh, contacted NEH to discuss and advise me on implementing the President's priorities as stated in the executive orders, including terminating grants that a reasonable person could deem to violate the executive orders. So was that the first time that you contacted someone at NEH about the agency?
Yes.
And it was Mr. McDonald that you contacted?
Yes.
You said you called him?
I believe so, yes.
So did you have a phone call with him and then an in-person meeting?
Yes.
And on the phone call, who was on the phone call? Fox?
I believe it was just me and Mike McDonald.
Okay, and what was said on that phone call?
I introduced myself briefly and said we would like to schedule an in-person meeting with myself and another colleague, Justin, in person.
And what did Mr. McDonald say?
He said, come in today and let's meet.
And did he say anything else?
I don't believe so, no.
How long did that conversation last?
I don't recall. Just brief.
And was that the conversation where he said he welcomes DOGE at the agency?
I don't believe he said that explicitly on the phone call, but he offered to host us at their office, and then in that in-person meeting, he said that he welcomed having a DOGE team onboarded to review the agency's spending.
Take a look at the next document, which we'll mark as Plaintiff's Exhibit 9. This is base labeled AR3. And this is a March 12th, 2025, 3:11 p.m. email from you to Mr. McDonald, copying Justin Fox. Does this look familiar to you?
Yes.
You recall sending this?
Yes.
So the first paragraph says, attached is a list of grants that were awarded during President Biden's administration, January 20th, 2021 through January 19th, 2025, at NEH. And then I'll skip the next sentence. And then it says, in summary, 1,295 grants, $376 million obligated, $54 million outlaid, spent, $322 million remaining, can presumably be clawed back. And then you say, I also flagged the $25 million in grants that we referenced in our meeting in a separate tab. So, a few questions. This summary information that you provide here in the bullet points, how did you get that information?
It's publicly available data.
On USA spending?
Yes.
What did you do to generate the attachment, the spreadsheet? Did you run a report in USA spending or something else?
We searched for NEH, used a filter for the date range mentioned here, and then clicked to download.
Why did you only list grants that were awarded during President Biden's administration?
Because that was what was in reference to the executive order.
What do you mean by that?
Let me find the... In paragraph 6 of Mike's declaration, those are the executive orders in which I'm referencing.
The executive orders referenced grants and contracts issued by the Biden administration specifically, or all active grants and contracts?
I don't understand your question.
There were grants or contracts issued at NEH and other agencies under the first Trump administration, for example, correct?
I believe so, yes.
So why did you attach a list of grants here that were issued only under the Biden administration and not prior administration?
We reviewed prior administration grants as well, but it was Mike's belief and Adam's that during the Biden administration there was a significant number of grants related to these executive orders that were issued under those 4 years. And so that was the primary initial focus that Mike and Adam asked us to focus on.
When did they ask you to do that?
That would have been in our in-person meeting.
And you then generated this spreadsheet, correct?
Yes.
Let's take a look at it. Actually, before we do, just a few more questions on this email. You say after the bullets, I also flagged the $25 million in grants that we referenced in our meeting in a separate tab. What was that $25 million?
I don't recall, but if you pull up the spreadsheet, we can look at it.
Okay. Before we do, the meeting that's referenced in this email Was that in person at NEH?
Yes.
And who was at the meeting?
It was myself, Justin Fox, Mike McDonald, and Adam, his deputy or COO. I don't remember Adam's last name.
Wolfson?
Adam Wolfson.
So the four of you?
I believe so, yes.
And so this email was sent on March 12th in the afternoon at 3. Do you know if the in-person meeting was earlier that day or?
It was the same day.
Same day. About how long did the meeting last?
About an hour.
And what was said at the meeting?
I don't recall all of the details in the meeting. We introduced ourselves, explained to Mike why we were there to try and support him in reviewing the executive, basically to remain compliant with the executive orders that the White House had just signed. Mike said he was excited to have us come in and help review the data. And we promised him at the end of the day that we would send him a list of the grants that were outstanding under the Biden administration initially, because Adam mentioned that their belief was that there was a large increase in the number of grants under this EO that were issued during that time.
That was something Adam said?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
It was both of them mutually agreeing, and I think Adam was the one that definitively said it, and Mike agreed.
Okay. So at the beginning of the meeting, who kicked off the meeting? Was it you or Justin?
It was probably me, just introducing myself and Justin, and then they provided an intro.
Okay. And what did they say in their intro?
I don't recall exactly. It was their background, how long they'd been at NEH, etc. Just general information about their personal backgrounds.
You say in this email that $376 million had been obligated. What's your understanding of the term obligated in this context?
Obligated means, as I understand it, when a grant is issued to a recipient, the obligated amount is the total potential amount of funds that the recipient can receive.
All right, let's take a look at, and what's that understanding based on?
What is it based on? That's what it means.
Okay, let's take a look at the spreadsheet, which is AR4. And we'll mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit 10. So I know some of the text is cut off and we'll go through it, but can you generally see okay the spreadsheet?
Yeah.
And this is the spreadsheet that was attached to that email?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So you see the first tab, it says Assistance Prime Award Summaries, is that right?
That's right.
And that's information that you got from USA Spending.
That's right.
And the second tab is called Biden Grants.
Yes.
If we click on that one. So these were all grants issued during the Biden administration, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the third tab is called Flagged Grants.
Yes.
Okay. What are these?
Can you zoom in? I believe these are grants that we've identified for Mike and Adam that would have been in violation of the executive orders that were signed.
These are the only grants that you believed were in violation of the executive orders, or is this a subset of grants you identified?
As you can see from the top left on row 3, this is called craziest grants, which in our view were the ones that were most obviously in violation of the executive orders. And then if you scroll down further, there were others that were also, in our view, potentially in violation of the EOs that we flagged for their team.
And when you say in our view, you're referring to yourself and Mr. Fox?
Yes.
How did you come up with this list of craziest grants?
We looked at both the master list of grants on tab 1 and the subset of grants under the Biden administration on tab 2.
When you say you looked at the grants, what do you mean?
We read the description in the relevant column.
Okay. So we could go back and look at that, but that's typically like a paragraph, right? A paragraph description. Does that sound about right?
You can go
Yeah,
back and
let's
pull
look
it
at one. So let's go to Biden grants maybe. And if we can scroll over to just look at row 3 here. So looking at row 3, column J, this is an example of a grant description, right?
Yes.
I'll just read the first few words. It says, documentary about Shirley Clark, founder of American Independent Film. How do you break into the Boys Club of Film Directing? And then it goes on for a few more sentences, right?
Yes.
So you looked at this description. Did you look at anything else?
The primary fields we were reviewing were the description column, the amount of the grant, and then whether there were still any funds associated with the grant that were outstanding.
Did you look at anything outside of the spreadsheet?
To instruct what was going on tab 2 and tab 3?
Yes.
No,
So you didn't look at like grant applications,
we did not.
or you didn't look at like the website for the grant project.
Oh, that's right.
Your review was restricted to this spreadsheet in terms of identifying grants in tab 3.
The description, as you can see, is quite exhaustive. And so, yes, we referenced the description.
In your view, that's an exhaustive
Description?
accounting of the grant.
I think it's a thorough description of what the grant is related to, yes.
And then let's go back to the flagged grants tab. There's a column on this tab called shorted description.
Yep.
What's that?
It's a summarized version of the full description on the prior tab so that it's easier for Mike and Adam to review what the grant is pertaining to.
And that's something that you generated?
Myself and Justin split the list.
Okay. I want to ask you about a few of these. So if we go to row 15, the shorted description, is it says examining experiences of LGBTQ military service. And then if we go to the long description, which I think is the next column over maybe, or I think you can stay in that flag grants and just go one over maybe. Yeah, long description. We can expand that. Perfect. So I'll just read this one. It says, examining military service from the margins, the complicated service discussion series will bring together veterans and community members to examine the experiences of service members who identify themselves as female, Black, Native American, LGBTQ, or an immigrant, and the dynamics, reasoning, and strength behind serving a country that does not always serve you in return. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
You and Mr. Fox identified this as one of the craziest grants at NEH.
I don't know, go to the left. Yes, it appears so.
Why did you do that?
Because it explicitly says LGBTQ.
Let's look at another one. Row 20. The shorted description here is legacies of HIV/AIDS prison movements in the United States. And I'll just read the long description. This is a history of the HIV/AIDS prison movement and its legacies in the United States. My book project narrates how activists fought the convergence of HIV/AIDS and incarceration from inside and outside prisons across the Reagan through Clinton years, and argues that this organizing holds legacies in the prison abolition movement of the 1990s to today. Drawing on archival and community-engaged research and oral history, I examine how incarcerated people organized HIV education and AIDS care work, and how supporters collaborated in protests and advocacy campaigns. The movement prolonged lives, changed policies, and confronted state-sanctioned harms with strategies for a freer and healthier society. I argue that by fighting HIV/AIDS in prisons, activists came to confront incarceration itself, bringing feminist and queer insights into prison abolition. My book will be of interest to scholars of history, gender, and LGBTQ studies, and the medical humanities, and to general readers interested in incarceration, abolition, and the impacts of HIV/AIDS and other pandemics. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
This is one of the grants that you or Mr. Fox identified as craziest at NEH, is that right?
That's right.
Do you recall whether you identified it as craziest or whether Mr. Fox did?
I don't recall.
Why did you identify this as one of the craziest grants?
Because it references feminist and queer insights into prison abolition and LGBTQ studies.
Any other reasons?
No.
There's a section later on in the spreadsheet called bad grants, if we could scroll down to that. It says other bad grants. What were these?
So in addition to our work of identifying grants related to DEI or others in the executive orders that we referenced previously, we also helped Mike and Adam identify other potential wasteful grants outside of DEI that we thought were potential for being canceled.
Let's take a look at row 36. So the short description here is documentary on Shirley Clark, founder of American Independent Film, DEI Films. And I'll just read the long description. It says, documentary about Shirley Clark, founder of American Independent Film. How do you break into the boys' club of film directing? Shirley Clark was a groundbreaking artist and a leader of the movement that created independent film in the United States. She declared war on Hollywood by telling stories about people who had always been excluded from the big screen. Black stories, gay stories, true stories. She was the only American to win recognition for her independent films in the 1960s. But then she was almost excluded herself, written out of film history. In our film, her contributions and extraordinary life come back to life. A timely tale of cool identity and struggle in New York City, Cannes, and Los Angeles from the 1950s to the 1980s with jazz. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
You and Mr. Fox identified this as one of the bad grants, correct?
Correct.
Why did you identify it as a bad grant?
We, the same reason as previously.
And could you just say it again?
Sure. We felt that it was in violation of the White House executive orders.
How so?
Can you read the description again, and I'll catch you when it violates it?
I'm happy to. It's also on the screen if you'd prefer to just take a look.
Can you go to the name of the grant again as well?
The short description is documentary on Shirley Clark, founder of American Independent Film.
Yeah, we felt it was in violation of the executive order 14151.
Why?
Ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing.
Well, that's the name of the executive order. Why did this grant violate that executive order?
Because it references DEI. It's literally in the name of the grant.
And the prior examples you also said were, those were on the craziest list. You said that they were crazy because they referenced LGBTQ, correct?
Not LGBTQ specifically.
Well, what specifically? Let's just go back. Let's go to row 20. This is legacy of HIV/AIDS prison movements in the United States. And let's go to long description. So I thought you had said that this one was crazy because it referenced LGBTQ. Is that?
Among other things.
So what are the other things?
We felt the latter part of the description, specifically bringing feminist and queer insights into prison abolition, on to say gender and LGBTQ studies, and so forth. So we felt that this referenced LGBTQ and preferencing and DEI altogether.
And that made it one of the craziest grants that NEH had.
Craziest in the context of being in violation of the executive orders.
And what's crazy about studying LGBTQ issues?
Nothing on its surface, but it's craziest in its egregiousness of the violation of the executive order.
For referencing LGBTQ studies?
Based on the executive order, yes.
Okay. Looking at that bad grant again, we were looking at. Row 36. This is the document around Shirley Clark. Can we just go back to that law and description? I think you had said that this was bad because it referenced DEI, but it actually doesn't, I don't think. Am I wrong about that?
Rejection.
Can you go back to the title of the grant?
So we don't have the title in this, that's the shorted description, I believe. We can maybe go back to the title. If we go to the Biden Grants tab, maybe search for Shirley. No. All right, maybe we'll come back to that, but if we look at the law description at least, the term DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion, that's not in the description.
The explicit term DEI is not in the description, correct?
Was there something in the description that you thought made it one of the bad grants?
Yeah, can we read it again?
Yes, please.
So I think the line about black stories, gay stories, true stories related to preferencing in the executive order that we continue to reference. And so we flagged it as a grant for potential termination because of that line.
That doesn't say anything about preferencing, right?
Black stories and gay stories.
Yeah, it just says stories about black and gay
That's
people.
true. It doesn't explicitly say anything about preferencing. That's
Yeah.
right.
And there's nothing like crazy about a story about a black person, right?
I don't-
Rejection.
I agree. No.
All right, we can take this down. If everyone's okay, maybe we'll do another 15, 20 minutes and then break for lunch.
Great.
Break now.
No, I'm good.
I'm showing you a document I'll mark as plaintiff's exhibit. I think this would be 11. This is labeled AR5. It's a March 13th email from Adam Wolfson to you and Mr. Fox, copying Mr. McDonald, 3:16 p.m. And he says, "Hi Nate, hi Justin, great meeting you yesterday and catching up today." So just to confirm again, the first time you met in person was March 12th, correct?
Yes.
That's the meeting we talked about before.
Yes.
And then he says, "and catching up today." So you met on March 13th as well?
I believe so. It may have been a phone call. I don't recall.
Okay. Do you remember that meeting?
Not explicitly, no.
Mr. Wolfson says, as discussed, I've copied below the link for the award spreadsheet created by Brett that the program directors used for their historical review of NEH's grants since January 2021. And I think we have AR6, which is that spreadsheet which we'll put on and mark as plaintiff's 11.
Wait, we already have an alarm.
Sorry, it'll be 12. So this is the spreadsheet linked to the email, correct?
I don't know. I assume so.
And in the email, Mr. Wolfson says, Mike and I will appreciate having your thoughts and suggestions. So did you review this spreadsheet?
Yes.
What did you do?
We read the program name, the recipient, the description, and the award value to the extent that it existed.
And what did you do with that information?
We looked at I have not seen all the columns on this file. I don't know. Can you zoom out a little bit or go across the spreadsheet? Okay, what did we do with it? We read it
For what reason?
to determine whether we agreed or disagreed with or I guess more specifically with Brett Bobley's review of the grants that were identified here for being in violation of the executive orders or referencing DEI or gender ideology or environmental justice.
So this was a spreadsheet compiling information that NEH staff had put together, is that right?
Yes.
And you were reviewing it to see whether you agreed or disagreed with their designations?
Yes.
Okay. Did you talk to Mr. McDonald or Mr. Wolfson about this?
Yes.
When?
I don't recall the exact date. It would have been in a subsequent meeting after the 13th of March.
What was said at that meeting?
I don't recall exactly.
What did you convey to them about your thoughts and suggestions about the spreadsheet?
So Justin and I compiled a list that you had just seen in the previous previous file, and we basically reconciled their review of their own grants versus our review of their grants, and then worked together to try and come up with a final list of grants that were either in violation because of DEI or because they were wasteful, in Mike's view.
The list that we were just looking at, you compiled that before reviewing this list, right?
That's right.
And you sent it to Mr. McDonald, Mr. Wolfson before Mr. Wolfson sent you this list, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you then took this spreadsheet, reviewed it, and compared it to the list that you had done before seeing this?
Yes, but the grants at NEH are exhaustive, and we had the entire list before coming up with our own list.
Okay. But you didn't have the staff comments, right?
That's right.
Okay. All right, I think this is probably a logical place to break for lunch, so we can go off the record.
Time is 11:58, and we're now going off the record.